let me give you this case, outcome of this case. The patient sees a psychologist and works through the trauma and anxiety. She improves with time and doesn't require medication. However, she has to work quite hard to be able to begin dating again due to trust issues with men, as you can imagine. That would be kind of an issue. She meets a man and they date for some time. She wants to wait to have sex until she's married, but once they marry, she begins to struggle once again with PTSD symptoms when she tries to become sexually active. As you can imagine, I mean, think of what this woman went through, right? So for her, sex is not a good thing. Sex is, you know, it's associated with a horrible trauma that she's had, right? So even though it's her husband and he's never done anything like that to her, you know, somehow it's going to be hard for her to separate that. So the PTSD starts coming back, and she goes back into therapy, and luckily the husband's, you know, at least understanding enough that he says, okay, I'll go with you and we'll try to work through this together. So with the psychologist's help, they're able to gradually, you know, have a healthy sex life, and she's actually able to go on and put the PTSD behind her for the most part. As you can imagine, these folks will tend to, they're always going to have some degree of symptoms. So it's almost like they've kind of scarred the brain, and it's not ever going to fully heal. But if she were to see a movie or read a book about something that happened like that to a person, you know, the sexual assault thing or something, that would maybe bring things back and make her worse. The psychotherapy, again, it's the same kind of stuff. It's talking through some of the issues and challenging some of the thoughts. Like with her husband, she's got to work through the fact that, okay, this guy is not going to do what the other guy did. Not all guys are that way. You know, challenging some of those thoughts. Serotonin medications like Zoloft is actually approved for this. It can help. There's also other medicines that we've used in the past. Anti-epileptics sometimes help. This is a case, actually, this is kind of interesting. Again, the benzodiazepines, we talk about anxiety, so we got to talk about benzodiazepines because they're used so often. There was actually a study done showing that it actually can worsen this illness, and the reason is, or the way it worsens it is, if the person's exposed to another, if let's say they get this trauma, like she has this trauma, she gets put on Valium because she's so distraught in the short term right after this event. That may do something to the brain, like calming down the healing process or something, keep preventing the healing process or something, because it looks like then if she gets exposed to another trauma, she's way worse than she would have been if she didn't get the Valium right after this first traumatic event. So that, in one instance, this is one instance where we probably wouldn't want to use a benzodiazepine for this illness. Now, I rifled through all that stuff very fast. Does anybody have any questions about any of these illnesses, or any other thing for that matter, if it's about the brain? Dead silence. Yeah?
I do have a question about obsessive compulsive.
Yeah.
What if a person has a certain way of doing things and, you know, kind of like the hand washing on a certain order, certain way of getting things done, but there's not the compulsive part. If they can't, but instead, if they can't do it that way, they don't do it at all.
Okay.
Now,
so,
is that just obsessive about the compulsive, or is it something completely different?
So the question is if there are certain, not really rituals, but patterns or methods with which you like to do things over and over again, or a person likes to do things the same way each time, but it's not necessarily, there's no obsession or compulsion with it. Is that what you're asking? What is that?
Well, like an example would be, you know, if you say you're going to clean the kitchen, if you couldn't clean the kitchen completely, then you can't do anything to it.
Okay.
I mean,
and you're asking if that's OCD?
Yes.
I doubt. I mean, first of all, does that interfere with function?
Well,
probably not. You know, so I don't know if it'd be a disorder. There is another thing we should talk about real quick. We can talk about it, and it's obsessive compulsive personality, and there's a disorder. You know, of course, if it interferes with your function, or again, it's people have traits. You know, like obsessive compulsive traits to their personality. Now this is different. These aren't intrusive thoughts. You know, the obsessions aren't intrusive thoughts that kick in, but it's a person who wants things done a certain way, and they need to do it their way, or it's not done right. Okay, very perfectionistic people. That's more of a, well, we call it a personality trait. What is that? It's the way you're wired. It's the way you're made. And again, just like I was talking about earlier, some people are made a lot that way, and some people are not that way at all. So they could care less about, you know, organization or anything being in order or how it's cleaned, even if it's clean, right? Other people, they really want it clean, and if they can't do it right, they're not going to do it at all at that moment. these are all what make us all human and unique. You know, we all have mixtures of different personality traits and different things, and you know, it takes all of us to make the world go right. It'd be kind of boring if we were all the same. Actually, we'd probably kill each other if it was all the same. If we were all obsessive and everything had to be our way, you know, you have 200 and some million people in the United States wanting everything their way. That'd be kind of hard. So, yeah, I don't think that's OCD. That's probably not OCD. It's probably some type of obsessive compulsive personality trait, probably not even disorder. Again, the disorder part, with any of these things, disorder means it interferes with your function. And, you know, to be OCPD, personality disorder, that has to be pretty bad for it to interfere with your function, I think. I mean, about the nearest way I can think it might is if you had a relationship with somebody who was just driving crazy, you know, which that happens, but it's not, I don't know, that's workable. It's not, you know, we don't usually treat people with medicine for OCPD, you know. OCD, you pretty much have to use medicine and therapy for that because it's debilitating. These folks can't, there are people who kind of lock themselves up in their room and won't come out, you know, with OCD because of fear of contamination and different things. Any other questions? That's a good question. Yeah?
On the post-traumatic stress syndrome, could it be something as traumatic as an abuse or something like that, or could it be something small, like you pass out in public and then that causes you to fear that from there on?
No, it could. The question is,
something different.
That's something different. That's probably more akin to, you know, some social anxiety or something like that, or a phobia or something like that. So the question is, if you don't mind me repeating, the question is, it's a good question. How bad does the trauma have to be for post-traumatic stress disorder? The trauma has to be threat to life or limb. So you have to, it's like you have to be pretty clear you're going to die, or somebody next to you is going to die. It's a life-threatening situation. So I think the question was, what if you passed out in a public place and then you became anxious about going back into a public place?
Yeah, or just anywhere. You're just afraid you're going to pass out anywhere just because of that first incident that you had of the
Yep.
passing out.
Yeah. That is it's a different type of anxiety. And it sometimes is, I'll tell you a real-life example. It was my college roommate, actually. He's not from around here, so I don't think he would mind me sharing this anyway. But he went out drinking one night, you know, as you can imagine, you know, college is what people do, right? So he goes out and he gets real sick, right? And he gets sick in a restaurant, and so he starts to associate restaurants with fear of vomiting. And actually, he started, I think what it was, panic disorder. He developed panic disorder, and so anytime he would go to a public place, you know, like a restaurant mainly, he'd have to run out of there because he'd be afraid he was going to vomit and everybody'd see it, and it was causing a lot of anxiety. So it was more panic disorder in his case. So because, you know, he'd start to have these panic attacks and worries about going out to the restaurants and things like that, and so he just avoided them all. So, and he didn't take any medicine. He went to psychotherapy and worked through that, and he's doing fine now. He goes anywhere he wants. So that's a good example, I guess. And I would think the same thing would pertain to somebody who was afraid of fainting. It'd be the same kind of thing, I think. Did that answer your question okay? All right. Yeah.
So post-traumatic stress doesn't have to happen to you. It doesn't have to be a danger. Like you had
Right.
parents who were abusive towards one another, and that caused later on, like if you got married and spouses disagreed, shut down
Yes.
because of that fear.
So the question is, for the trauma for post-traumatic stress disorder, does it have to occur to the person that gets the disorder, or can it be to somebody somebody else? And very commonly it's to somebody else. So let's say you're in a military situation, your buddy next to you gets blown up right in front of your face. You might well develop PTSD from that. And that wasn't you it wasn't you that experienced it. You know, it wasn't your life. I mean, I guess it sort of was, because, you know, they're in the same situation right next to each other. But in your example of an abusive situation where a parent, maybe it's a child and the parents are fighting a lot or something, usually it needs to be pretty severe fighting. But I mean, if somebody's, you know, just about ready to kill somebody and you're witnessing all that, yeah, that can lead. Yes, absolutely. That can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder in anyone, you know, but in that child, yes.